Good evening. Welcome to the workshop session of the Mayor and City Council of the City of College Park. I'm Mayor Bianca Motley Broom. We have a quorum present with Council Members McKenzie, Arnold, and Gay in person. I believe Councilmember Karn is joining us via telephone. And so I will call the workshop to order at 6:04 p.m. The only item on the agenda is how does parking reform intersect with city revenue, affordable housing, and economic development? Councilmember McKenzie?
Yes, I'm going to ask John Duke if he'll come get us started, and he will introduce our presenter.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman McKenzie. I met Tony Jordan at the Strong Towns Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina in May of 2023. And Tony with his organization called Parking Reform Network and Strong Towns. They're doing a lot of the in-the-weeds, really hard lifting work to really address some of the major problems that we face all across America, not just College Park. And so Tony is here to present, some ideas and things that address things like affordable housing and economic development. And today he was quoted in the New York Times. So there was an article dealing with trying to increase housing in Brooklyn, and there was a parking issue dealing with it, and he was quoted in it. But anyway, with that, I will let him have the show. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to come talk to you. As mentioned, my name is Tony Jordan. I am the president of an organization called the Parking Reform Network. We're a nonprofit organization. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm going to talk to you about parking. A little warning. 15 years ago, I didn't know anything about this. I was not a planner. I read a book, 700-page book about parking policy, and it blew my mind. I never saw things the same way again, so if I do my job well, you unfortunately will not see things the same way again either. If you're familiar with the movie They Live, you put on these glasses and see the world quite differently. Parking spaces are expensive. They take up a lot of space. So when I look around and see an empty parking lot, I see dollar signs. I see the ghosts of what was in these places before, and I see the promise of what could be in them in the future. I mentioned briefly, we're a nonprofit organization. We're an organization with about 800 members around the country. We're 5 years old. Our members are academics, policymakers, practitioners, activists, folks from all walks of life, and we really are focused on just helping people to understand this policy and sharing best practices solutions from around the country. We're here to talk about the parking problem, which often would be considered to be not having a place to park exactly where you want, and that's actually not the problem that I see and that we're increasingly becoming aware of. The parking problem in the United States is actually we have probably too much. People ask me often how many parking spaces there are in the United States, and the answer is too many to count. It's at least 3 or 4 parking spaces per car, and that's a lot of vehicles in the United States. So the overbuilding of parking in the United States over the last 70 years has led to unaffordable housing, inefficient transit, sprawl, environmental problems, and economic strain on cities. This starts with something called parking mandates. Parking mandates or parking requirements, minimum parking requirements, parking standards, are a section in almost every zoning code in the United States that dictate a specific amount of parking that needs to be provided for any new business or building that's built. An example of this might be a bowling alley. If you want to build a bowling alley in a number of cities in Fulton County, you can see here that it may range from Roswell, 2 per lane, 4 per lane in Riverdale, 5 per lane in Milton, 7 in Forest Park, 8 in Palmetto, In College Park, you actually have 2 specific parking mandates for bowling alleys, 7 per lane and 8 per lane. Union City would be about 10. And no one's really building bowling alleys anymore, but this goes to show just like what could be the difference between a bowler in Roswell or a bowler in Palmetto or College Park that would require 3 times the amount of parking to be provided for a simple use like a bowling alley. These mandates seem arbitrary, and they almost seem like they could be made from, an astrologer picking from the stars or someone throwing darts at a dartboard. And it's not far from the truth. This is a planning advisory service from 1954. It shows that architects and developers in this, at the time these mandates were going into effect, were simply guessing. And they admit in this slide here, they would just guess a number of stalls, and either it was too many or not enough. So this is in the 50s before these mandates existed. Unfortunately, these mandates would get written into the zoning code, and they're often quite ridiculous. I point out bowling alleys. We have things like haunted houses in Gilbert, Arizona, 1 per 100 square feet. Cemetery in Carver, Massachusetts, 1 per 8 occupants. That's people buried in the cemetery. I'm not just picking on College Park here, but there's plenty to look at. Another city in Georgia, small city, Woodbury, Georgia, has very specific parking mandates. 0.72 per employee at a hospital, or 0.26 per student at a high school. This small town, which I've never been to, but I've looked at on Google Maps, no one's flying a helicopter there, has 2 separate land use categories with specific parking requirements for helicopters, a heliport and a helistop. And hell if I know what the difference is. It's funny in a way, but it's really not a laughing matter, because these parking mandates are like the DNA. The zoning code's the DNA of the city, and these are one part of them. So with the excess parking required, you can't build places that are traditional in scope for humans. You can't build walkable places anymore. We have places that are theoretically easy to get to if you drive, but oftentimes not pleasant places to be because they're hot, they're spread out, and there's traffic on the way. So some of the issues with this, how it really impacts us. The first is cost. Parking is very expensive. A surface parking stall costs in the thousands of dollars. This doesn't include land costs. This is just the construction. So $5,000 to $7,000 for a surface spot. A structured spot, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. It really is locally dependent, but these are prices that you will find, and 30 is about as low as it will go. And going below ground is 50 to 100% more usually than building above ground. These are real costs that cause real impacts. This is an example from Stamford, Connecticut, where they built a park and ride station for about 900 cars. It cost $90 million, $88,000 per car for a commuter to park at the park and ride. In the same town, there's a Franklin Apartments that is a permanently, deeply affordable housing complex that houses about 120 people. So for less than the price that you can let in this case, Stamford, Connecticut, probably wealthy commuter park their car and commute to New York, you can actually build a home for someone. And this is a choice we make regularly. Here in town, you have, I walked by, John showed me the Ion Arts Apartments. I looked up what these cost to purchase, and there's apartments listed on the 2nd and 3rd floor, so there is a little bit difference of where they are, but the only difference between this one apartment, between purchasing the apartment at $180,000 versus $212,000 that I could find, is that the one that's $212,000 comes with a dedicated parking space. And that's not even a structured parking space, that's like a permitted space. So I assume that the cost difference there, a little bit of it could be for being on the 3rd floor, but probably not paying $31,000 for being on the 3rd floor. The space of these is dramatic. Quite often the limiting factor in how much housing is built on a site is not the zoning for the housing, it's how much parking you can fit. A parking space takes about 300 to 400 square feet when you include aisles. So we look at how this spreads out, human scale versus automobile scale. This is a Bolle restaurant on Virginia Avenue, I believe, compared to the Captain D's chicken restaurant. You can just see the difference in scale of how much smaller that the chicken restaurant is and how much more parking there is, and the Bole restaurant is oriented on the street. So a lot of times the way that we build when we have parking mandates makes it so that it's not attractive to anyone walking. It's actually, you have to walk across this hot parking lot, which is increasingly a problem. Pedestrian-oriented versus auto-oriented. So this is, Main Street here, 2 parts of Main Street. But if you just think, those are to scale. Both these photos are exactly the same scale. So if you look at the number of businesses and homes in the photo on my left, I think your left as well, compared to the one on the right, you got 2 businesses. One is large, it's a grocery store, 2 businesses and 2 homes versus, about, I think it's 8 or 9, maybe 10 businesses and a number of homes. So just thinking about how these mandates in the space impact what you can build and how it orients towards people. Just a common parking requirement, College Parks is a little less, but 1.5 to 2 parking spaces per apartment is roughly the size of a, fairly good size apartment that people might, that even one that a person with a child could live in. A lot of times the cost is important, but also if you think about what you're losing in the space. I looked up the census records for renter households in College Park. This is one of the highest ones I've seen around the country. It's usually around 60% of renter households own 1 or fewer cars. And here in College Park, as you can see, it's close to 80% of renter households actually only own 1 car or less. So almost 25% of renter households don't own a car in this community. And this could be a single parent. So if you're requiring more than 1 parking space or even 1 parking space, you might be causing a burden. When I talked about those costs, I should mention if a parking space costs $30,000 to build, that's going to add about $300 a month to the rent that someone's got to pay for that space, whether they want or need that space or not. Just another example that was pointed out to me by John, you have the Diamond College Park apartments, which many of them are affordable, replacing a parking lot. If you had on-site parking requirements for this building, it's probably unlikely that it would have been built, I would guess. Just as I know that often when we talk about people who are not driving or don't have cars, there are concerns about equity concerns or mobility concerns. And those are valid and important concerns. This is a book by someone named Anna Zivarts that came out earlier this year. Anna is a person with nystagmus. She can't drive, and she lives in Washington State in a rural area, and wrote this whole book that has stories about people who, about 30% of the United States population at any given time, including children and elderly people, don't have access to a vehicle. So people are living in communities everywhere that don't have access to cars, and they don't have access to the types of homes or commercial areas and businesses that might serve their needs. Over the years, these parking mandates have led to so much parking in our cities. My organization has done surveys of downtown areas showing how much of them are taken up by parking lots or parking garages, and it's like 20 to 30% in most cities. Atlanta, 25%, and this is often a best case scenario. If you look, we'll look at a slide in a second, but if you look at an area that was built, an old downtown, it actually has a lot less parking than any new commercial areas that might be built. On the top, these are kind of small, but this is, downtown College Park on the right, the Main Street, showing, a number of businesses versus one of the areas by the Old National Mall, I believe it's called, a little south. And you can just see how much less dense and how much more pushed apart these businesses are based on kind of when they were built, and a lot that it's likely due to when those businesses were built. In the lower slide, the mandates for one parking space for every 100 square feet for a restaurant, for example, were in place. The next slide just does show, it's hard to see, but it does show a number of dots. It's not perfect, but you can kind of see the business density compared in the one slide to the one below. Again, those are at scale as well. They're the same size. So you just have a lot more businesses possible in an area that are closer together that's built without the parking mandates. This is an issue for almost every city needs more revenue or has revenue costs. Infrastructure, required roads, power, water is the same whether it's serving a parking lot or a home. And so lower density development is fine, but it's got to be recognized that the tax revenue per acre for very low density commercial or low density housing is usually far lower than higher density. And it's not to say that your entire city needs to be higher density, but recognizing that this can be very good for providing services and infrastructure for a community is to allow, when possible, for some densification. Finally, there's environmental impacts, of course. Climate impacts, GHGs, transportation is one of the largest contributors, but also increasingly water runoff, water quality from water runoff, urban heating is a big problem, and just light pollution actually as well. So there's a number of environmental reasons to pursue these reforms. So quickly sum up on this part, we have a lot of common goals around the country: reducing traffic congestion, increasing active mode shares, increasing housing availability, clean air and water, economic vitality. And if you're requiring a lot of parking, it is a barrier to almost all of these. Parking causes, the existing traffic is supported by the parking you have, and building for cars diverts money you could spend on transit or other modes. More parking is less housing. Transportation and sprawl are major GHGs contributors, and parking mandates can be a major barrier to business entry for entrepreneurs, and they lead to pretty poor tax performance of property. So there's a solution. There's this guy, Professor Shoup. He's a professor at UCLA. He's been working on this for a lot longer than me, about 45 years. And he's got 3 steps. Eliminate parking mandates, price your curbs for appropriate occupancy, and use the money for local benefits. The first one, getting rid of your parking mandates. You wouldn't be alone. There's 74 cities, at least in the United States right now, that have done this. They are cities of many shapes and sizes and many different political climates. 36 of them are populations less than 50,000, so it's not just a big city situation. In fact, a lot of them are smaller cities, so this is a tested and not so, and a lot of these have done this just in the last 5-6 years. This slide is just to show, like, you don't have to go full on Hoboken or some large, extremely dense area. But if you even just, these are to scale again, and it's just kind of interesting to look at it in a very, very dense place relative to College Park, and really recognize how much space you could have to grow at a pretty moderate pace and house a lot more people or have a lot more opportunity for people. It is more than parking minimums. Getting rid of these mandates is kind of like the first step in planting a garden. If you have a garden, you can't just go throw vegetable seeds in your grass. That won't work very well. You have to remove grass, rocks, and weeds first. That's kind of what getting rid of your mandates are, but that still doesn't grow a garden. You got to plant things, you got to nurture it, you got to prune, you got to weed. So there's other steps you need to take. Next slide, please. One of them is that I like to say cities should mind their own business when it comes to parking. Do not stop telling developers and business people how much parking they need for a coffee shop or a funeral home or a bowling alley, and instead have a policy to manage your own curbs so that if there is congestion on the curb, you're managing that, and that sends the right signal to them to provide the amount of parking that their tenants or customers need. The right price, there's a simple equation. You're not trying to gouge anybody. You want to set the lowest price for parking in this would be on downtown city streets. That leaves a space open available on every block roughly so that someone can almost always pull in. That's great for businesses because someone can always pull in. This is a data-driven and responsive to demand policy, and it does increase turnover and access to businesses. So usually when you institute good curb management, as it would be called, sales receipts go up, for example. This is just showing, kind of how you're finding this 85% utilization. Your city would set a policy that you want to have availability on the curb, and then you empower the transportation authority to increase or decrease the space on particular block faces, depending. This also helps to direct parking demand off the main street if there's availability just a block or two away, or if there's lots a block or two away. And then finally, you also want to really spend this money wisely. You don't want it just to disappear into a general fund. You can help with political, buying political support for this, or finding political support for this by committing to spend the money locally on local improvements. Ideally, these are improvements that help your existing parking supply to be used better, like lighting, better sidewalks, but they can also be things that improve the environment for businesses, better sidewalks, garbage collection, graffiti removal, and so on. And I have a copy of this booklet for you. I will leave with the clerk. Things you can spend that money on, I mentioned, but sidewalks, crosswalks, better lighting. You can also buy transit passes, for example, for local employees. You can do things if you're pricing parking to mitigate the impacts. Critical thing here is if you're thinking about intensifying your city zoning, or if you're looking at new development, try to resist the urge to provide more parking until what you've got is being utilized. This is a slide showing, a block of the Main Street where you've got two largely empty lots very close by, within 500 feet. There's a one-way on John Wesley Avenue now that has some parking supply. So the idea here is it's okay to let things intensify a little bit, because there actually is quite a lot of parking in downtown College Park. What will happen when you do this? Probably nothing initially. The city is going to be the same place it was the day before. Getting rid of parking mandates is not getting rid of parking. It's not removing or prohibiting building of parking. In cities that have done this recently, Buffalo and Seattle, for example, what they found is the majority of the housing that was built would not have been possible under the old rules, but 70% of the housing that was built did include some parking. The evidence out of Austin that did this is that you get about 12% more parking, 12% more housing in an apartment building. So you get a bit more of what you want and a bit less of what you don't. This is an incremental approach that doesn't change anything immediately. If you have a missing middle housing or an infill policy, this is what makes it work. If you have an infill policy that requires parking for every unit, it's not going to lead to a lot of housing being built. Once you remove that constraint, they saw in Seattle, the number of accessory dwelling units took off. And finally, this allows for a lot of unlocked potential. The parking, as we mentioned, once you're not regulating that it has to be for a specific use, it can be shared among different businesses or businesses and tenants. And it does increase your ability to provide ridership and revenue for the transit. So the recommendations, to summarize: lift costly and arbitrary parking mandates, adopt performance-based curb management policies, and commit your parking revenues to local improvements in transportation demand management. That's things like bus passes and other things to encourage people to take transit. Finally, I think, John has asked me, I think one of the questions is, what, I don't live here, I'm not telling you what to do, but I do think thinking about what people want, how your community is, plan for what you want. Or you want to plan for the type of development that this is from, this is down by the old mall, or more like the development along the Main Street that's got a lot of businesses and pedestrians. So that's my presentation. I do have some auxiliary slides with the zoning code on them, but I don't think we'll need them. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Councilmember McKenzie?
Tony, I want to thank you for your presentation and just kind of helping us to begin to think outside the box and look at the possibilities that we can have. Of course, I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, and grew up in a city where I didn't even get my driver's license till I was 23 years old, and in graduate school in Virginia. So I'm definitely I understand how this can work. I think what was interesting is the fact that as I was meeting with the Regional Leadership Institute, that we started realizing that, the having to put parking spaces, when we start looking at making housing more affordable or the attainable, I'm not gonna call it affordable housing, but making housing more affordable or attainable for the middle class, that getting rid of some of these parking mandates that we put on developers can set up a situation where even in our TOD district that we can have housing that people that work in the city of College Park can actually afford to live in. Just kind of interesting what you showed us just now regarding one of the developments that we have, that a purchase, the same exact 500 square feet, is over $30,000 difference, I believe, or close in that market, just because that person gets a parking space. So just kind of looking at that, the question that I have, and this is kind of maybe for the city attorney and the city manager, we were talking about College Park being able to operate parking lots. Now, we do have we have some public parking that is free right now, but to charge for parking, and I've kind of ran this behind, I think, but Winston, what would, are we able to actually charge for parking as a municipality?
Yes, ma'am, we're already doing it. I mean, right at the GICC, we time to time charge
Okay.
there at Gateway Arena. If it's a facility that construction we own, we can certainly charge for parking.
Okay, and the reason I asked is because I think there was a concern about maybe some legislation between, because of the airport parking lots, but that falls under a different category, so.
Yeah. The airport is a convoluted beast, I mean, and so I say everything with the caveat that there may be some covenant that we did with somebody at the airport that restricts our ability, but I was making a general proposition, but it's always dicey when we think about our complicated relationships at the airport.
Okay, but if we wanted to take some of the lots that we have right now that Tony was showing us by Nouveau, and I think there was 2 lots you showed us in that area, one off of John Wesley Dobbs, I believe, and turn that into paid parking, that would be okay.
And to clarify, the best practice would be, if you're charging, for example, on the streets, because the most convenient spot is the one that's right in front of the place someone wants to go. So that's the one that, ideally is going to be the one that you start charging for. And then that encourages other people then to go park. Maybe the lot is free, but they have a reason to go and not circle around a lot. So it can really reduce some congestion too, because it provides some availability, but also signals hey, just go park 2 blocks away. If you get more development, those spaces might become valuable enough that you actually can charge for them, and then you would have some revenue. You're never trying to charge for something that no one wants to park at, right? This isn't about just gouging people. It's really about managing, as you have more intense development potentially or more customers, how do you provide, it's good for neighbors and it's good for the businesses to have, the city taking a role in managing the curb.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Councilman Arnold?
I have one question. My question is in reference to the management, the performance management. You talked about the other cities. Who are they relying on to manage?
For the on-street management?
For the curbs.
It can really depend. There's a lot of options nowadays. 15 years ago, you would have had to contract with a large company like Flowbird, like a company that made parking meters and install a bunch of hardware. Now there are a lot of lighter weight app-based solutions. There's companies like Park Mobile or Passport. So the same, if you've been to a city that has an app-based thing, that's probably the way to go. It's much more nimble. It's got a lot less on the ground. Installation. They have expertise also to provide. It's a pretty simple, you don't need to get too complicated. You don't need to be adjusting prices 50 times a day. Seattle adjusts prices maybe once or twice a year. The key is to kind of get at a good price and then just monitor, and you're really just trying to respond and show the public that you've got a handle on it, right? If someone builds an apartment, it's okay. We're going to be okay. We can manage our streets.
So does the management, I guess, more of a role, so does that responsibility then fall on the city staff, or does it fall on a third party?
I think you could do it either way. I'm not technically a consultant in this fashion, but I would say that one thing I would recommend is you don't set yourselves up to vote every time you want to adjust the parking price, right? You set a goal. We set an 85% occupancy goal, and then your public works department or whatever is basically charged with the job of figuring out how to achieve that occupancy goal on the street. So then when the price, you might set a range. Sometimes the city council will set a range, and then it's kind of that's a procurement or a policy. There's pretty simple, there's examples you could pull from other cities of what the policy says, but it can be pretty simple. We want to encourage turnover and economic vitality. So we want to protect parking in the neighborhood for businesses. So we have these policies that kick in, allow the Public Works Department, for example, to create a permit district or to add paid parking in an area.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gay?
It was a good presentation. Thank you for visiting with us. I think I heard you say that there's no uniformity in parking around different cities. Parking takes a lot of money, it costs developers more money. But with College Park, aside from that, which is separate from your presentation, is that we're challenged with parking for airport. So we have to get into stuff like parking districts. So we do have some other unique parking challenges that would be worth taking a look at as well.
Yeah, every city is different, and I look at local examples around what's going on, but I would say there's opportunity potential and challenges that you could look at. I mean, there are. I would just say there's opportunity for a custom solution. It's not. That's part of the whole thing here. Is it's not a one size fits all. You got to look at what you got on the ground and what you want to see happen.
I don't have anything else.
I think one of the challenges we face here is not only, I don't think we have a parking issue as much as we have a wayfinding issue. We have parking available, we just don't necessarily get people to it in an efficient manner. And that has been a challenge that has been before us for quite a number of years. Because as you pointed out, there is off Main Street parking readily available that most people don't know about because we do not do a very good job of directing them there. And additionally, our TOD zoning, I know there was pushback on that last year in terms of some residential development that was supposed to move forward and the number of parking spaces based upon that TOD ordinance. And there was pushback even on the reduced number that was required in the TOD. So hopefully everyone can keep this in mind as we move forward and don't just forget about it and say this is good that we're having this discussion now and then don't put our money where our mouth is later, because it also impacts our ability to compete for funding. And as we move forward with innovative projects, not only in our city but in the entire region, these are the types of things that people are looking for. And so it makes a lot of sense, and appreciate your time today. So
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I've been spending the weekend around here. It's pretty cool. Been walking around, John showing me all the stuff, and I think there's a lot of good potential. I hope to come back and see it even better.
thank you, sir.
Mayor,
we'll see everybody at
Mayor,
7:30.
Mayor, I have questions as well as comment.
Councilmember Carn?
Councilman Carn is, okay.
Councilmember Carn, go ahead.
Well, hi, everybody. Good evening. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm glad to be here. It's late where I am. I certainly was hoping that I was not going to be skipped over or looked over because I wanted to participate fully in this meeting. I forget your name. You're the fellow with the Parking Reform Network, correct?
Yes, Jordan is my last name, yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Great information, very informative. I think the parking challenge for College Park is twofold. One, yes, a reduction in parking space requirements. I think it's something that we need to be looking at seriously. Things are trending in that direction. Our MARTA station, for instance, is moving to a fee-based parking model, which is a first for us, for instance. So things are changing around, the parking environment, more or less. In terms of our multifamily and hotels, looking at fewer spaces per unit or per room is something that we need to seriously look at. But the second challenge is the lack of parking along the downtown corridor. Yes, we do have a parking issue and a wayfinding issue, but there is a parking issue along downtown, and particularly on the weekends. So we also need to look at that in terms of wayfinding, better wayfinding. We need much better wayfinding. But the issue of hospitality, as we are a hospitality city, customers and visitors, the issue and the challenge are when they start to encroach into our residential neighborhoods, and particularly on the weekends. Now, and for others, a permanent parking space is important to some folks that choose to live somewhere. I've even heard people prioritize covered parking as a necessity. In regards to our motels and multifamily stock, and I talked about our multifamily stock because most of which is over 40 years old in these complexes, and that does compromise the majority of our residential parking citywide. So we have to factor that into things, as well as street parking. The requirements of 40 years past may not need to apply in terms of our multifamily. Our apartment units also have individual buildings, and being that they are older, a lot of times that building may be lost in its entirety due to a fire, and 40-year-old buildings, did not have firewall requirements, for example. So when we lose a building in our apartment complexes, which we've lost dozens over the years, what should that require in terms of parking? I don't want those spaces to end up becoming more parking along the lines of what's been going on within some of our motels. City manager, this is very important, where some of our motels are subletting frankly, for an illegal secondary business on the motel premises of airport parking. So I believe that this trend may eventually start to possibly happen within our apartment complexes as they look for new revenue opportunities or lose the building. So we got to be, when we discuss parking, we need to look at it as a whole. Just keep in mind, as Councilmember Gay mentioned, the park and ride lots are a factor in our parking as well. Currently, I believe park and ride lots are no longer permitted in the city. But this backdoor way that some businesses are making this happen is a phenomenon we need to look at. Last thing I'll say in terms of Main Street, there's a phenomenon that occurs along, main drags, throughout the U.S. I guess it's impulse patrons of businesses. They'll see a storefront or restaurant directly on the street and look for that parking space directly in front of that store, which we have very far and few. So there are other factors I want to make sure that we look at and factor into this as we discuss this. But great presentation, but we need some follow-up and we need some direction in terms of what we are doing. And city manager, looking into that illegal airport parking that is going on in several areas of the city, that's something that we need to crack down on as well in terms of our parking plans and how we're going to move in the future. So that was all I had. We need to definitely follow up and figure out a good parking plan holistically, though, for all aspects of parking. So thank you.
Councilmember McKenzie?
No, I was getting ready to tell you that Councilman Carr was on the call, and I didn't know if he wanted to say something. So I want to say thank you. And since we're talking about Main Street, John, thank you for putting the signs up. John has put some signs up over the last couple of days. So when you're walking up Main Street, it'll let you know, okay, maybe 400 feet, whatever you're from, Eden Fresh, that kind of thing. So we're creating a more walkable community. But thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see
Yes,
everybody at
right.
7:30.
Mayor, excuse me, do you want to announce our reception starts at 6:30, make a formal announcement?
We've got a reception for the city manager at 6:30. That started at 6:30.
And this is the
Y'all
sign.
mad? I didn't know you're frowning. Everybody okay? Okay?